The dust settled on the main street of Willow Creek as Lillian Owen watched the last of her husband's belongings sell for pennies on the dollar, her weathered hands clutching a tattered shawl around her trembling shoulders. 3 months a widow, and already the vultures of this frontier town had stripped her bare, leaving her with nothing but whispers that followed her like shadows, worthless widow. They called her, as if her value had been buried alongside Thomas in the hard Wyoming soil of 1878. Lillian drew in a ragged breath, squaring her shoulders against the weight of judgment. At 26, she was neither young enough to be pitied nor old enough to be respected in her solitude. The auction's conclusion left her with barely enough to cover a week's lodging at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, much less the outstanding debts Thomas had hidden from her until his dying breath. "That concludes today's proceedings," announced the bank manager, Milton Hargrove, his thin mustache twitching with barely concealed satisfaction. "Mrs. Owen, I trust you'll be vacating the property by week's end." She nodded stiffly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Thomas had left her with a homestead she couldn't maintain, debts she couldn't pay, and a reputation she couldn't escape. The small parcel of land they'd called home for 5 years would now belong to the bank, just like everything else. "Perhaps you ought to consider the generous offer from Mr. Coleman," Hargrove suggested, his voice dripping with false concern. "A woman alone has few prospects in these parts." Lillian's jaw tightened. Jasper Coleman, the saloon owner, had made his intentions perfectly clear: employment of the basest kind, the sort that would strip away what little dignity she had left. "I would sooner starve," she replied, her voice low but steady. Hargrove's smile vanished. "Then starve you shall." As the crowd dispersed, Lillian remained rooted to the spot, wondering how her life had come to this. Thomas had been a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity, the next stroke of luck. She had loved him for his optimism, even as she feared his recklessness. In the end, that recklessness had killed him, a mining accident that crushed not only his body but their future. "They're a pack of vultures, the lot of them." The deep voice startled Lillian from her thoughts. She turned to find a tall man leaning against the hitching post, his face partially obscured by the brim of a worn Stetson. She recognized him vaguely, one of the ranchers from the outskirts of town, though she couldn't recall his name. "I don't recall asking for your assessment," she replied, too weary for niceties. A smile tugged at his lips as he pushed away from the post. "Nathan Pierce," he offered, extending a hand that bore the calluses of hard work. "I own the Double P Ranch about 10 miles east." Lillian hesitated before accepting the handshake. "Lillian Owen, though I suspect everyone in this town knows exactly who I am. And what they don't know, they invent," Nathan replied, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Small towns run on gossip the way engines run on coal." Despite herself, Lillian felt the ghost of a smile form. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Pierce? Actually, I was wondering if I might help you." He gestured toward the small bundle of possessions she'd managed to retain. "Need a ride anywhere?" Suspicion flared immediately. "What do you want in return?" Nathan's expression sobered. "Not everything comes with strings attached, Mrs. Owen. In my experience, Mr. Pierce, everything does." She gathered her meager belongings. "Thank you for the offer, but I can manage." As she turned to leave, Nathan called after her. "I need someone to cook and keep house at the ranch. The pay is fair, the work honest, and you'd have your own quarters. No strings." Lillian froze, warring with herself. Pride demanded she refuse, survival urged her to accept. "Why would you offer such a thing to a stranger?" she asked without turning around. "Because I've buried someone too," he answered simply. "And I know what it's like when the world keeps spinning while yours stops." Something in his voice, a raw understanding, made her turn back. "I'll consider it." "The offer stands. I'll be at the general store until noon tomorrow." He tipped his hat and walked away, boots kicking up dust in the late afternoon sun. That night, in her rented room at the boarding house, Lillian stared at the ceiling, weighing her options. The room would be hers for only 3 more days before her funds ran dry. She could swallow her pride and accept Jasper Coleman's offer, which would keep her fed but destroy her soul. She could leave town entirely, try her luck in Cheyenne or even Denver, though the prospect of traveling alone frightened her more than she cared to admit. Or she could accept Nathan Pierce's proposition, a stranger's kindness that seemed too good to be true. By morning, desperation had made the decision for her. She packed her few belongings and settled her account with Mrs. Peterson, who offered a rare, sympathetic smile. "You take care now, Mrs. Owen. This town's been unkind to you, but not everyone shares their sentiment." The general store smelled of coffee, leather, and tobacco when Lillian pushed open the door. Nathan stood at the counter, examining a ledger with the proprietor. He looked up at the bell's jingle, his expression brightening when he saw her. "Mrs. Owen," he greeted, closing the book. "Have you reached a decision?" Lillian straightened her spine. "I accept your offer, Mr. Pierce, provided we establish clear terms." A smile spread across his face, transforming the rugged features into something unexpectedly handsome. "Of course. Shall we discuss the particulars over coffee?" They settled at a small table in the corner, where Nathan outlined the position. The wages were indeed fair, more than fair, truthfully, and the duties reasonable. Cooking for him and occasionally his ranch hands, maintaining the house, laundry, and other domestic tasks. In exchange, she would receive not only payment but room and board in a small cabin adjacent to the main house. "Why me?" she asked finally, still searching for the trap. "Surely there are others better qualified." Nathan studied her for a moment. "Because you need it, and I need someone who understands loss. People who haven't faced hardship tend to quit when things get difficult." He paused. "And because I've heard you make the best apple pie in 3 counties. Lillian couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. "Thomas always did have a sweet tooth." "Is that a yes, then?" she nodded, extending her hand. "It seems we have an arrangement, Mr. Pierce." The Double P Ranch sprawled across rolling grasslands, dotted with stands of cottonwood and pine. The main house stood 2 stories tall, weathered but well-maintained, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. To its right sat a smaller cabin, simple but sturdy, with a small garden plot that had clearly seen better days. "It's not much," Nathan said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's yours for as long as you want it." Inside, the cabin was clean but sparse: a bed, a dresser, a small table with 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove for heating. A window overlooked the ranch yard, where men moved about their duties, leading horses and mending fences. "I'll leave you to settle in," Nathan said, depositing her trunk by the bed. "Supper's usually at 6, but take today to rest. We can start tomorrow." Alone in her new home, Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to exhale. She had survived, not thrived, perhaps, but survived. For now, that would have to be enough. The following weeks established a rhythm to her days. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Nathan and whichever hands were staying at the ranch house. Mornings were filled with baking, cleaning, and laundry. Afternoons with mending, gardening, and preparing the evening meal. The work was hard but honest, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Lillian slept without dreams. Nathan proved to be a fair employer. He kept his distance, respecting her privacy while ensuring she had everything needed to perform her duties. Their conversations were brief but cordial, centered around meal planning or household matters. Only occasionally did Lillian catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. The ranch hands treated her with a deference that bordered on caution, as if unsure how to interact with the town widow now in their midst. All except for Elias, a weathered cowboy in his 60s who had apparently been with the Pierce family since Nathan was a boy. "The boss hasn't had decent food since his ma passed," Elias told her one morning as she kneaded bread dough. "You're breathing life back into this place, Mrs. Owen." "I'm merely doing what I was hired to do," she replied, uncomfortable with the praise. Elias chuckled. "If you say so." He glanced toward the window, where Nathan could be seen breaking a young horse in the corral. "He's a good man, Mrs. Owen, better than most. I never suggested otherwise." "No," Elias agreed, "but you haven't let yourself see it either." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and ambled out, leaving Lillian to ponder his words as she shaped the dough into loaves. That evening, as she served dinner, Nathan cleared his throat. "I'm riding into town tomorrow for supplies. Is there anything you need?" Some thread would be appreciated, Lillian answered, and perhaps some seed for the garden if it's not too much trouble. Consider it done. He hesitated, fork hovering over his plate. Would you care to join me? The change of scenery might be welcome. The invitation surprised her. I have laundry scheduled for tomorrow. The laundry can wait a day. His eyes met hers. Unless you'd rather not return to town so soon, understanding dawned. You think I'm hiding out here? Aren't you? The directness of his question caught her off guard. I'm being practical. My reception in Willow Creek isn't exactly warm. All the more reason to return with your head high, Nathan replied. Running only proves them right about whatever they're saying. Lillian set down the serving spoon with more force than necessary. And what exactly do you think they're saying, Mr. Pierce? I don't much care what they say, he answered evenly, but I suspect you do. The truth of his words stung. Very well, she conceded. I will accompany you tomorrow. The journey to town the next morning passed in relative silence, though not an uncomfortable one. Nathan proved to be a man who appreciated quiet, a trait Lillian had come to value after Thomas's constant chatter. As they approached Willow Creek, however, she felt anxiety tightening her chest. Second thoughts? Nathan asked, noting her tension. No, she lied, gripping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. Remember, he said as they pulled onto the main street, you've done nothing to be ashamed of. Heads turned as they passed, whispers following in their wake. Lillian kept her gaze forward, refusing to acknowledge the stares. At the general store, Nathan helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. Inside, Mrs. Abernathy, the storekeeper's wife, barely concealed her surprise. Mrs. Owen, she greeted, her tone cool. We didn't expect to see you back in town. I require thread, Lillian replied simply, moving toward the notions counter. As she selected her purchases, she became aware of hushed conversation between Mrs. Abernathy and another customer. Living out at his ranch now, hardly a proper arrangement, always knew she was that sort. Anger flared, hot and sudden. Lillian turned, facing the whisperers directly. If you have questions about my employment, ladies, you need only ask. Mrs. Abernathy flushed, but her companion, Mrs. Coleman, the saloon owner's wife, lifted her chin defiantly. We're merely concerned for your reputation, dear. A widow living alone with an unmarried man. People will talk. People will talk regardless, Lillian replied. I've learned to value truth over gossip. And what is the truth? Mrs. Coleman pressed, her eyes glittering with malice. That you found a new protector so quickly after your husband's passing. Before Lillian could respond, Nathan's voice cut through the tension. Mrs. Owen is employed as my housekeeper, nothing more. His tone was pleasant but carried an undercurrent of steel, though I fail to see how her employment is anyone's concern but ours. Mrs. Coleman's gaze shifted between them, skepticism evident. Of course, how? Progressive of you, Mr. Pierce. I've always considered myself a forward-thinking man, he replied, placing his purchases on the counter. Will that be all, Mrs. Owen? Lillian nodded, keenly aware of the eyes following them as they completed their transaction and left the store. I apologize, Nathan said once they were back in the wagon. I should have anticipated the reception. It's hardly your fault, Lillian replied, though her hands still trembled slightly. Small towns breed small minds, not all of them, he countered, guiding the horses toward the feed store. Just the loudest ones. The remainder of their errands passed without incident, though Lillian felt the weight of observation with every step. As they prepared to leave town, a voice called out Nathan's name. They turned to find Jasper Coleman approaching, his usual swagger accentuated by the silver-trimmed vest he wore. Pierce, he greeted, his gaze sliding to Lillian with undisguised interest. And Mrs. Owen, what a pleasant surprise. Coleman, Nathan acknowledged coolly, something you needed. Just being neighborly. Coleman's smile didn't reach his eyes. Checking on Mrs. Owen's welfare, we were all concerned when she disappeared so suddenly. How thoughtful, Lillian replied, her tone frosty. Though your concern comes rather late, Mr. Coleman. Coleman's smile faltered. Now, Mrs. Owen, I made you a generous offer when you were in need. You made me an offensive proposition, she corrected, which I declined then as I would now. Nathan's posture stiffened beside her. I believe we're finished here, Coleman. I suppose you are. Coleman's gaze hardened. Though I wonder what Thomas would think of his widow running to another man's bed so quickly. The words hung in the air like gunsmoke. Nathan moved so quickly that Lillian barely registered his intent before his fist connected with Coleman's jaw, sending the man sprawling into the dust. "Apologize to the lady," Nathan demanded, standing over the fallen man. Coleman spat blood, his hand moving toward his belt. "I don't apologize to whores." Nathan's boot pressed against Coleman's wrist before he could draw the weapon. "That's not the word I'd use for her," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I'd call her a woman of remarkable courage and dignity, a woman who's worth my life and every acre I own." His weight increased on Coleman's wrist. "Now apologize, or the next thing you lose won't be your pride." A crowd had gathered, watching the confrontation with avid interest. Coleman's eyes darted around, calculating his options before finally settling on surrender. "My apologies, Mrs. Owen," he muttered, the words clearly costing him. Nathan removed his boot, allowing Coleman to scramble to his feet. "Don't let me hear you speaking of Mrs. Owen again," he warned. Not even to say good day. As they drove out of town, Lillian's thoughts whirled. "That was foolish," she finally said. "You've made an enemy today." "Coleman was already no friend of mine," Nathan replied, his knuckles white on the reins. "And I meant what I said." The simple declaration hung between them as the wagon rolled toward the ranch, laden with more than just supplies. That night, Lillian couldn't sleep. Nathan's words replayed in her mind, "Worth my life and every acre I own." She had spent months believing herself worthless, her value diminished by Thomas's death and the town's judgment. To hear someone, especially someone like Nathan Pierce, declare her worth so emphatically had shaken something loose inside her. At dawn, she gave up on rest and made her way to the kitchen, intending to start breakfast early. To her surprise, Nathan was already there, coffee brewing on the stove. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, pouring her a cup. "No," she accepted the coffee gratefully. "Yesterday was eventful." A rueful smile crossed his face. "I apologize if I overstepped. It wasn't my intention to make things more difficult for you." "You didn't," she assured him. "Though I'm quite capable of fighting my own battles. I never doubted it." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "But sometimes it helps to have an ally." "Is that what you are, my ally?" Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability replacing the usual calm. "I'd like to be more than that, if you'd allow it." The admission hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm still mourning Thomas." "I know," Nathan set down his cup. "And I'm not asking you to stop. Grief doesn't vanish because something new begins." "Then what are you asking?" "For permission to court you properly," he replied. "No hurry, no pressure, just time for us to know each other beyond employer and employee." The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. "People will talk even more. Let them," he smiled. "We know the truth." Lillian took a deep breath. "I need time to consider." "Take all you need," Nathan said, rising. "I've waited this long. I can wait longer." As spring yielded to summer, Lillian found herself slowly opening to possibilities she had thought forever closed. Nathan proved to be a patient suitor, respecting her boundaries while making his interest clear through small gestures, wildflowers left on her doorstep, a book of poetry she had mentioned enjoying, conversations that stretched long into evening on the porch. Her garden flourished under her care, much like the tentative relationship growing between them. When Nathan suggested building a small greenhouse to extend the growing season, Lillian was touched by his investment in her passion. "You don't need to do that," she protested as he measured the space beside her cabin. "I want to," he replied simply. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations, but it's never felt more alive than since you arrived." The words warmed her more than the summer sun. "I've been thinking about what you said about courting." Nathan straightened, caution and hope mingling in his expression. "And I'd like that," she admitted. "Though I'm not sure how to begin again at my age." His laugh was soft and genuine. "We're hardly in our dotage, Lillian." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a pleasant shiver through her. "No, I suppose not. We could start with a dance," he suggested. "The Harvest Festival is next month in town." The thought of returning to Willow Creek, this time openly as Nathan's companion, gave her pause. "Are you certain that's wise?" "I'm certain I want to dance with you," he replied. "The rest is secondary." As the weeks passed, Lillian found herself looking forward to the festival with equal parts anticipation and dread. She used some of her saved wages to order fabric from the general store, working late into the night to create a new dress, deep blue calico with white trim, more becoming than anything she had worn in years. The night before the festival, Nathan knocked on her cabin door. When she answered, he held out a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, accepting it hesitantly. "Open it and see." Inside lay a silver cameo brooch, simple but elegant. "Nathan, I can't accept this." "It was my mother's," he explained. "She would have wanted you to have it." The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on her. "Are you certain?" "More certain than I've been about anything in a long time." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Lillian, I know it's been less than a year since Thomas passed. I know grief has its own timeline. But I also know that what I feel for you is real and enduring." Her heart thundered in her chest. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of hoping again." She looked up at him, vulnerability raw in her expression. "Of losing again." Nathan's gaze held steady. "I can't promise you'll never lose again. Life doesn't offer those guarantees, but I can promise you won't face it alone, not while I draw breath." The festival grounds buzzed with activity, children racing between stalls, women displaying their preserves and needlework, men congregating around the whiskey barrel and horse races. Heads turned as Nathan helped Lillian down from the wagon, but this time she met the stairs with calm dignity, the silver cameo gleaming at her throat. They moved through the crowd, Nathan's hand a steady presence at the small of her back. Some nodded greetings, others pretended not to see them. Lillian found, to her surprise, that their opinions mattered less than they once had. As evening fell, lanterns illuminated the dancing area, and a small band struck up a lively tune. Nathan extended his hand. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Owen?" "You may, Mr. Pierce," she replied, allowing him to lead her onto the wooden platform. His arm around her waist felt right in a way she hadn't expected, their movements falling into natural harmony despite her years of absence from such gatherings. As they turned, Lillian caught sight of Mrs. Coleman and her circle, their disapproving glares unable to penetrate the bubble of happiness surrounding her. "You're smiling," Nathan observed, his own expression mirroring hers. "I am," she agreed. "It feels good." The night progressed, and Lillian found herself relaxing into the festivities. Nathan introduced her to neighboring ranchers and their wives, many of whom treated her with genuine warmth. She even found herself laughing during the pie auction, where Nathan bid an outrageous sum for her apple creation. "You could have just asked me to bake you a pie," she teased as they shared the dessert later. "Where would be the fun in that?" he replied, his eyes crinkling with mirth. "Besides, it's for charity." As they prepared to leave, Jasper Coleman intercepted them near the wagons. His face had healed from their last encounter, but his pride clearly hadn't. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, the words slurring slightly. "The party's just getting started." "Good night, Coleman," Nathan replied evenly, attempting to guide Lillian past him. Coleman stepped into their path. "I've been thinking about what you said last time, Pierce, about her worth." His gaze raked over Lillian. "I'm still not seeing it." Nathan tensed beside her, but Lillian placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Mr. Coleman," she said calmly, "your opinion of my worth matters about as much as a Mustang's opinion of a piano recital, neither requested nor relevant." A ripple of laughter went through the onlookers who had gathered to witness the confrontation. Coleman's face darkened with anger and embarrassment. "You weren't so high and mighty when your husband left you with nothing," he spat. "He left me with my dignity," Lillian replied. "Something you clearly know nothing about." Before Coleman could respond, his wife appeared at his side, her expression thunderous. "Jasper, that's quite enough," she hissed, pulling at his arm. "You're making a spectacle of yourself." With a final glare, Coleman allowed himself to be led away, leaving Lillian and Nathan at the center of curious stares. "That," Nathan said as he helped her into the wagon, "was magnificent." The ride home was quiet but companionable, the stars brilliant overhead in the clear autumn sky. When they reached the ranch, Nathan walked her to her cabin door. Thank you for tonight, Lillian said, suddenly shy under his gaze. I enjoyed myself more than I expected to. As did I. He hesitated, then reached out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear. Lillian, may I kiss you good night? The question, so formal and respectful, touched her deeply. Yes, she whispered. His lips were warm against hers, the kiss gentle yet charged with promise. When they parted, Lillian found herself breathless, her hand clutching his lapel. Good night, he murmured, reluctance evident in his voice. Good night, she echoed, watching as he walked back to the main house, his figure silhouetted against the night sky. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing with it long evenings by the fire and snow-blanketed landscapes, Lillian and Nathan's courtship deepened. They shared stories of their pasts, Nathan's childhood on the ranch with his stern father and gentle mother, Lillian's upbringing in St. Louis before meeting Thomas at a church social. She told him of Thomas's dreams and schemes, the way his enthusiasm had swept her along despite her cautious nature. He sounds like he was a good man, Nathan observed one evening as they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill. He was, Lillian confirmed. Impulsive and sometimes reckless but good-hearted, he wanted so much to provide for me to give me the life he thought I deserved. And you, what did you want? The question gave her pause. I'm not sure anyone ever asked me that before. Nathan took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. I'm asking now. I wanted stability, she admitted. A home, children, a garden that lasted more than a season before we moved on to the next opportunity. She smiled ruefully. Boring dreams, perhaps. Not boring, he corrected. Fundamental, the kind of dreams that sustain a person through hardship. Christmas brought a rare gathering at the ranch house, with the Hands who had no family nearby joining them for dinner. Lillian had spent days preparing, baking pies and bread, roasting a turkey, and decorating the house with pine boughs and red ribbons. As they sat around the table, Nathan raised his glass. To family, those born to us and those chosen. The sentiment brought unexpected tears to Lillian's eyes. She had not realized until that moment how much the ranch had become home, how much these people had become her family. Later, after the Hands had retired to the bunkhouse with full stomachs and high spirits, Nathan presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? She asked, surprised by the gift. Open it and see, he replied, echoing his words from months earlier. Inside lay a deed to her cabin and the surrounding acre, including her garden and the newly built greenhouse. I don't understand, she said, looking up at him in confusion. It's yours, Nathan explained. Regardless of what happens between us, I want you to have security. A home that can't be taken from you. The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed her. Nathan, I can't accept this. You can, he insisted. Consider it payment for services rendered if that makes it easier. This is worth far more than what I've earned. No, he said softly. It's worth far less than what you've given me. Impulsively, Lillian rose and crossed to him, placing her hands on either side of his face. You are a good man, Nathan Pierce. His hands covered hers. Does that mean you'll accept? On one condition, she replied. That you understand this doesn't change my feelings for you. I'm not staying because I have property now. I'm staying because I want to be where you are. The joy that spread across his features was answer enough, even before he pulled her into his arms. Spring arrived with the promise of renewal, the land awakening from its winter slumber. On a clear April morning, Nathan asked Lillian to ride with him to the eastern edge of the property, where a small hill overlooked a meandering creek. It's beautiful here, she remarked as they dismounted, taking in the view of rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers. My father proposed to my mother on this spot, Nathan said, helping her spread a blanket on the ground. They're both buried over there beneath those cottonwoods. Lillian understood the significance immediately. Nathan, he took her hands in his. Lillian Owen, I know you came to my ranch out of necessity, not choice. I know you faced more sorrow and hardship than anyone should have to bear. But watching you rebuild your life with such grace and determination has been the greatest privilege of mine. Tears blurred her vision as he continued. When I told Coleman you were worth my life and every acre I own, I meant it. You've brought light back to this place and to me. He reached into his pocket, producing a simple gold band. I love you. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, I will. They were married in May beneath the cottonwoods where Nathan's parents rested. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by the ranch hands and a few neighboring families who had become friends. To Lillian's surprise, even Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house made the journey from town. I always knew you were made of stronger stuff than they gave you credit for, the older woman told her, pressing a quilt into her hands as a wedding gift. That night, as Lillian joined Nathan in what was now their home, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here from worthless widow to beloved wife, from desperation to contentment. What are you thinking? Nathan asked, drawing her into his arms. That grief can be the end of one story, she replied, but also the beginning of another. And is this a story you're happy to be part of? He asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Lillian kissed him in answer, pouring into the gesture all the love and gratitude she felt. It's the only story I want to be part of, she whispered against his lips. A year later, on a warm summer evening, Lillian sat on the porch of their home, cradling their newborn daughter while Nathan worked in the corral nearby. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, expanding to include a small orchard beside her thriving garden. Occasionally, they still encountered whispers when they visited Willow Creek, but the malice had largely faded, replaced by grudging respect for their success. Jasper Coleman had moved on to Cheyenne after his saloon burned down, and the town was slowly changing, growing into something more than the sum of its gossip. Nathan joined her on the porch, his expression softening as he gazed at their child. How are my girls? He asked, pressing a kiss to Lillian's temple. Perfect, she replied, leaning into his embrace. Absolutely perfect. As the sun set over the land they both loved, Lillian reflected that sometimes a person's worth couldn't be measured in dollars or acres, but in the strength to begin again, and in the hearts brave enough to recognize that value when others could not.